No radio, no backup, no orders. Just a retired war dog standing in the dark, between armed men and a quiet town that never knew his name. Rex did not charge. He did not attack. He chose to stand. Beside him was a former soldier who knew this moment too well. The second where violence would be easy and restraint would be harder. That night, Rex proved something no uniform ever could. His greatest mission did not end with war. It began with protecting life, without being told. The morning in rural Montana arrived wrapped in a pale, reluctant light, the kind that filtered through low clouds and made winter linger even when the calendar insisted on spring. A thin mist clung to the ground like a half-forgotten memory, and the air smelled of damp earth, pine sap, and old metal. The K-9 Rehabilitation and Retirement Facility sat at the edge of the town, a low concrete building bordered by chain-link fences and aging watchlights that no longer watched much of anything. Snow still hid in the shadows along the fence line, dirty and compacted, refusing to leave. It was quiet here in a way that felt deliberate, as if the world itself had agreed to speak softly out of respect for what had been broken and what was still trying to heal. Behind one of the reinforced steel enclosures stood Rex, a 9-year-old German shepherd whose body bore the careful symmetry of disciplined breeding and disciplined violence. He was large, powerfully built, his chest broad and steady, his shoulders thick with muscle that had not yet learned it was no longer needed. His coat was a deep blend of sable brown and black, dense and weathered, with a faint silvering around the muzzle that came not from age alone, but from stress that had carved itself into his bones. His ears stood alert, but imperfect, the left one carrying a small permanent notch near the tip, a souvenir from a night operation years ago. One of his hind legs favored the ground, just enough to be noticed by those who knew what to look for, stiff in the cold, the legacy of shrapnel that had missed the bone, but not the nerve. Rex did not bark. He did not pace. He did not whine. He stood still, head level, eyes forward, breathing slow and controlled, like a soldier waiting for a command that never came. Around him, the other dogs reacted as dogs were expected to react. They barked at footsteps, lunged at the fence when volunteers passed, tails wagging or bristling depending on temperament and trauma. Some were young, confused by the sudden absence of handlers and gunfire. Others were old and loud, desperate to remind the world that they still existed. Rex ignored them all. His amber-brown eyes tracked movement with precision, but no urgency. He had learned long ago that noise wasted energy, and energy was life. Silence for him was not submission. It was discipline. The facility staff had learned not to take his stillness as calm. They called him unadoptable, in low voices, not out of cruelty, but fear, the kind that grew when people realized they could not read something anymore. Rex had served 5 tours alongside special operations units. He had detected explosives buried beneath roads that looked innocent. He had cleared rooms filled with darkness and the scent of fear. He had learned the language of hand signals, pressure, and breath. He had once moved forward through chaos, guided only by the heartbeat of a man crouched behind him, trusting that rhythm more than sight or sound. Those instincts did not retire when his file did. They simply waited. On the other side of the corridor stood Sarah Mitchell, the senior caretaker on duty that morning. She was 46 years old, tall and lean, her posture slightly curved from years of bending toward cages and kennels, from years of trying to meet broken animals at eye level. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a practical knot at the base of her neck, streaked with premature gray she never bothered to hide. Sarah's face was calm in a practiced way, her expressions measured, her eyes kind but guarded. Years ago, she had been a veterinary technician full of optimism, the sort of woman who believed love and patience could fix anything. That belief had cracked the night her younger brother, a military handler, was killed overseas in an explosion his dog had detected seconds too late. Since then, Sarah had learned restraint. She was gentle, but she was careful. She loved the dogs, but she did not lie to herself about what they were capable of. She stopped in front of Rex's enclosure, clipboard tucked against her chest, boots echoing softly on the concrete floor. Rex acknowledged her presence with a slight shift of his gaze. He knew her scent well: antiseptic, wool, faint traces of coffee, and cedar. Sarah met his eyes without flinching, though she never stepped too close. "Morning, Rex," she said quietly, her voice even, respectful, as if addressing a man rather than an animal. He did not respond, but his ears angled a fraction in her direction, absorbing the sound, cataloging it. Sarah exhaled slowly. She always did that with him, as if reminding herself to breathe. "He still hasn't made a sound," she murmured to Tom Alvarez, a junior handler who stood a few feet behind her. Tom was 28, broad-shouldered, with the restless energy of someone who had not yet learned how much the world could take from you. His dark hair was cropped short, his expression open, hopeful to a fault. He had joined the facility less than a year ago, drawn by a love for dogs and a vague admiration for heroism. He still believed every animal could be saved the same way. Tom looked at Rex with a mix of awe and frustration. "Maybe he's just waiting," he offered. Sarah didn't correct him. Some lessons came best through time. Rex's history file sat heavy in Sarah's mind. Officially, he had been retired due to injury and behavioral rigidity. Unofficially, no one wanted to say out loud that he was too good at his job. He did not know how to be anything else. When the war ended for him, no one had taught him what peace looked like. He had not been trained to chase tennis balls or nap in living rooms. He had been trained to move forward when told, to stop when told, and to protect the man behind him with his life. Now there was no man behind him. There was no command. There was only the waiting. The weather outside worsened as the morning wore on. Wind rattled the metal siding, and clouds thickened, dimming the light until the facility seemed submerged in gray. Rex felt the pressure change in the air, the promise of snow or rain. His body adjusted automatically, muscles tightening just enough to be ready. He remembered nights like this, nights when weather masked movement, when danger came quietly. His mind did not replay images the way human minds did, but his body remembered, the way adrenaline sharpened the world, the way silence meant everything. A family walked past his enclosure later that day, escorted by a volunteer. A man and woman in their 30s, bundled in coats, with a young boy clutching a stuffed dog to his chest. They stopped at each kennel, smiling, waving, reacting to barks with laughter. When they reached Rex, the boy froze. Rex did not move. He did not bare his teeth. He simply looked back, steady and unblinking. The boy tightened his grip on the toy. The mother murmured something and gently guided him away. Sarah watched from down the hall, her jaw tightening. She wrote another quiet note on the clipboard. "Not suitable for families," she thought, though the words tasted bitter. It was easier to label him dangerous than to admit they did not know how to help him. As evening approached, the facility settled into its nighttime rhythm. Lights dimmed, sounds softened. One by one, the other dogs curled into restless sleep, punctuated by barks and whimpers as dreams chased them. Rex remained standing, not because he could not sleep, but because no one had told him it was safe to do so. His breathing slowed. His eyes stayed open. He watched shadows stretch and contract with the movement of clouds outside. Somewhere deep inside him, something ancient and patient waited. Not for war, not for violence, for purpose. He had completed every mission ever given to him. He had followed every order without hesitation. Now, with his body scarred and his file stamped "retired," The world had turned quiet and confusing. Yet the discipline remained. The loyalty remained. The instinct to guard, to serve, to stand between danger and those who could not see it. That remained too. Rex did not know the shape of his next mission. He only knew it had not yet arrived. And so he waited, silent behind steel bars, a soldier without orders, eyes fixed on a horizon no one else could see. Ethan Walker drove east through Montana under a sky the color of old steel, the road stretching ahead of him like a question no one expected an answer to. Snowmelt ran in thin streams along the shoulder, and the mountains stood back at a distance, watching without judgment. He kept the truck windows cracked despite the cold, needing the bite of the air to stay present. At 41, Ethan still carried the physical shape of a Navy SEAL, tall and broad-shouldered, his movements economical, his posture unconsciously alert. But the sharp edge had dulled. His dark brown hair was cut short in the way it had always been, now threaded with gray at the temples. His eyes were a washed blue-gray, the kind that had learned to scan a room instinctively, even when there was no room to scan. He wore a faded olive field jacket, an old habit rather than a necessity, over a plain gray shirt, jeans worn soft with age, and boots that had seen more dust and blood than snow. To strangers, he looked like a man passing through. To himself, he looked like someone who had missed an exit years ago and never quite stopped driving. He had survived everything he was trained to survive. Ambushes, explosions, the sudden, violent silence after a firefight. What he hadn't survived with any grace were the nights that followed. Nights without orders, nights without voices in his ear, nights where the quiet pressed down harder than any enemy ever had. Sleep came in fragments, if at all. When it did, it brought dreams he did not invite and could not control. Faces without names, sounds without sources. Waking up was not relief. It was obligation. Ethan woke each morning because there was nothing else to do. He told himself he was not looking for anything as he drove. Not a job, not a home, certainly not a dog. He had avoided that thought carefully, the way one avoids a memory sharp enough to cut. Dogs had been part of his past life, woven into missions and loss and trust that bordered on sacred. He did not trust himself with something that loyal anymore. What he was looking for, though he would never phrase it that way, was permission. Permission to keep breathing without feeling like he was stealing air meant for someone better. The town appeared gradually, a scattering of buildings crouched low against the wind. The K-9 Rehabilitation and Retirement Facility sat just beyond the last cluster of homes, utilitarian and unremarkable, the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Ethan did not plan to stop. His hands turned the wheel anyway. Muscle memory, perhaps, or something quieter. Inside, the smell hit him first. Antiseptic, metal, animals. His body reacted before his mind did, shoulders tightening, breath shallow. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the reception desk, her tall, lean frame outlined by fluorescent light. She looked up as he entered, assessing without staring. Her demeanor was calm, professional, but not cold. Years of working with damaged creatures had taught her how to be open without being naive. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan nodded once, unsure what he was nodding toward. "Just looking," he said. His voice was low, roughened by disuse. Sarah noticed the way his eyes moved, the way his weight balanced evenly on his feet. She had seen men like him before. Not many. Enough. She gestured him toward the corridor. As they walked, she spoke in a measured tone, explaining the facility, the process, the warnings. Her words floated past him until they didn't, until they stopped at one enclosure, until the world narrowed. Rex stood exactly as he had hours earlier, silent, unmoving, eyes fixed forward. The noise of the facility faded. Ethan felt it then, the sudden, unmistakable recognition. Not familiarity, kinship. Rex's gaze shifted, meeting his. It was not curious. It was not pleading. It was steady, appraising, aware. The kind of look Ethan had seen reflected in mirrors during deployments, in moments when fear had been acknowledged and set aside because there was work to do. He felt something in his chest loosen, then tighten again, like a muscle remembering its purpose. Sarah spoke quietly behind him, offering context, caution, labels. Retired K-9, behavioral challenges, not suitable for families. Ethan barely heard her. He crouched slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, respectful. Rex did not move. He did not growl. He did not bark. His ears angled forward slightly, registering the shift. Ethan noticed the scar on the ear, the stiffness in the hind leg. He noticed the discipline in the way the dog held himself, even now. Especially now. This was not a pet. This was a soldier who had been told the war was over and never taught what came next. Tom Alvarez hovered nearby, watching with concern and fascination. To him, Ethan looked tired but dangerous, the way old weapons sometimes were. Tom wanted to warn him, to say something useful, but Sarah's subtle shake of the head stopped him. Some moments required space. Ethan stood. "What's his name?" he asked. "Rex," Sarah replied. The name settled into Ethan's mind with unexpected weight. Rex did not react to it. He did not need to. Ethan nodded, more to himself than anyone else. "He's still on duty," Ethan said quietly. It was not a question. Sarah studied his face, searching for something reckless. She found instead a deep, exhausted clarity. They talked longer than Ethan expected, about Rex's history in broad strokes, about injuries, about liability. Ethan listened this time. He understood the risks. He had lived inside them. He did not promise anything. He did not say he could fix the dog. He only said, he shouldn't be waiting alone. The words surprised him as much as they did Sarah. When Ethan finally left, the sky had darkened, snow beginning to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. He sat in his truck for a long moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. He had not come looking for a dog. That much was true. He had come looking for a reason not to disappear quietly into the miles. Inside the facility, Rex remained standing, eyes following the retreating shape of a man who moved like someone who understood orders, even without giving any. Two lives brushed past each other, close enough to recognize the fracture in the other. Two souls no longer in uniform, still standing at attention, unaware that the next mission had already begun to form. The warnings came in careful voices and official language, delivered across desks and down fluorescent-lit corridors where the walls had learned to echo restraint. Dangerous, not suitable as a pet, unstable under domestic conditions. Ethan Walker listened to every word with the attention of a man who had once survived because he listened. He nodded at the right moments. He asked the right questions. He did not argue. When the sentences ended, he let the silence speak for him. Silence, he had learned, often told the truth more cleanly than fear ever could. Sarah Mitchell sat opposite him in the small administrative office, her tall, narrow frame folded into a chair that looked designed for someone smaller. She kept her hands flat on the table, fingers long and steady, nails trimmed short. There was a faint scar along her right forearm, pale and old, the result of a panicked dog years earlier. She did not hide it, but she did not explain it either. Sarah's calm came from loss, not comfort. Her brother's death had taught her how quickly devotion could become devastation. It had taught her to measure love carefully. She studied Ethan's face as she spoke, watching for bravado or denial. She found neither. What she saw instead was a fatigue that felt honest. Tom Alvarez stood by the door, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His youth showed in the way he wanted to help and did not yet know how. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his uniform still too crisp. He had grown up admiring men like Ethan, imagining heroism as something clean and bright. Now, watching Ethan sign forms without flourish, Tom felt the first crack in that illusion. This man was not chasing glory. He was choosing responsibility. The paperwork was thick, each page a small barrier erected by people trying to protect themselves from regret. Ethan read every line: liability waivers, behavioral disclosures, medical notes detailing Rex's injuries and limitations, a hind leg that stiffened in cold weather, heightened alertness, difficulty disengaging from perceived threats. Ethan did not rush. When he signed, his handwriting was neat but heavy, the ink pressing firmly into the page as if to anchor the decision. He did not smile. He did not thank anyone. He simply finished, set the pen down, and waited. Rex felt the change before he saw it. The air in the corridor shifted. The cadence of footsteps altered. He stood as he always did, posture aligned, muscles ready. When Sarah and Ethan approached, Rex's eyes tracked them, noting details. Ethan's gait was measured, his center of gravity controlled. This was someone who knew how to move without drawing attention. Rex's ears angled forward. He did not step back. Sarah unlocked the enclosure with deliberate care. The metal latch clicked, a sound Rex associated with movement and expectation. She opened the gate slowly, keeping her body angled, giving him space. "Easy," she said, her voice low. Not a command, a courtesy. Rex did not bolt. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward one paw at a time, weight shifting cautiously, testing the ground beyond the familiar boundary. The concrete felt the same. The air smelled different. Freedom, it turned out, had a scent. Ethan crouched a few feet away, not reaching, not speaking. His presence was an anchor without pressure. Rex took another step, then another. When all four paws were outside the enclosure, he stopped. There was no order to follow, no handler behind him. For the first time since his training began, Rex stood without a directive. His breathing quickened slightly, a subtle sign only those who knew him would catch. The world was suddenly wide. A young volunteer named Lily passed at the far end of the corridor, a woman in her early 20s with a soft face and nervous eyes. She froze when she saw Rex out of his kennel, her hands tightening around the leash of a small mixed-breed dog beside her. The little dog, Milo, was 3 years old, compact and sandy-colored, his tail wagging with reckless optimism. Milo barked once, high and sharp. Rex turned his head, assessing. His body did not tense. He did not advance. He simply watched. Lily swallowed and hurried past, relief flooding her expression. Sarah noted the restraint with quiet satisfaction. Outside, the weather had shifted from falling snow to a cold, persistent drizzle. The sky hung low, pressing the world into muted shades of gray. Ethan led the way to his truck, moving at Rex's pace, not ahead of it. Rex followed without a leash, not because he had been told to, but because the man's presence created a line he did not wish to cross. The gravel crunched beneath his paws, unfamiliar but firm. He lifted his head, ears catching distant sounds. A crow, a truck engine, wind through bare branches. The absence of gunfire was almost louder. At the truck, Ethan paused. He opened the back door, revealing a blanket folded neatly across the seat, water set within reach. Practical, prepared. He did not gesture. He waited. Rex approached, sniffed, evaluated. He placed one paw on the threshold, then the other, climbing in with care. The door closed softly. Not a cage, a boundary chosen. As they pulled away, Sarah stood beneath the overhang, rain darkening her jacket. She watched the truck until it disappeared down the road, a strange mix of fear and relief settling in her chest. She had done her job. She hoped she had done the right thing. Tom exhaled beside her, grinning despite himself. "He's going to be okay," he said, more prayer than statement. Sarah did not answer. She had learned not to promise outcomes she could not control. The drive was quiet. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. Rex lay in the back seat, head lifted, watching the world slide past. Fields gave way to trees. Town faded into distance. The rain eased, leaving the air clean and sharp. Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the weight he carried. Not happiness, not peace, responsibility perhaps. The kind that asked something of him in return. When they reached the edge of the forest road leading toward Ethan's isolated cabin, he slowed, aware that this was a threshold for both of them. Rex shifted, sensing the change. He did not know what waited ahead. Neither did Ethan. What they knew was this. The warnings had been heard, the risks acknowledged, and still the choice had been made. A broken man and a retired dog moved forward together, not because anyone told them to, but because something in each recognized the other as necessary. Rex lay down as the truck rolled on, not sleeping, simply present. Ethan drove, shoulders loosening for the first time in years. No orders had been given, no commands obeyed. Yet something had begun. The cabin appeared at the end of the forest road like something the land had reluctantly agreed to tolerate. It was built of darkened timber, low and broad, pressed into a clearing surrounded by pines that rose like watchmen who never slept. Evening settled early beneath the trees, the sky bruised with purple and gray, the last light thinning as if unsure it should stay. The air was cold but still, carrying the scent of sap and wet soil. To most people, the place would have felt peaceful. To Ethan Walker, it felt exposed. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, listening. No engines, no voices, no distant city hum. Just wind threading through branches and the faint ticking of metal cooling under the hood. Rex shifted in the back seat, lifting his head. His ears angled outward, mapping the forest by sound alone. This place was unfamiliar, but it was not empty. Nothing ever was. Ethan stepped out first, boots crunching softly against gravel and pine needles. He moved around the truck, opening the back door without hurry. Rex did not jump out. He waited, watching Ethan's posture, the set of his shoulders. When Ethan stepped aside, Rex emerged with care, paws testing the ground, body aligned toward the tree line. His tail remained low, not tucked, not loose. Alert. Ethan noticed and did not comment. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the most accurate response. Inside, the cabin was sparse. One main room with a wood stove against the far wall, a small kitchen tucked to the side, a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom and a bathroom. The furniture was functional and worn, chosen for durability rather than comfort. A single couch, its fabric faded. A table scarred with old knife marks. No photographs, no decorations, nothing that suggested permanence. Rex stepped inside and stopped, nose working, cataloging scents. Old smoke, coffee, metal. One human, long-term. No other animals. He circled once, slow and deliberate, then stood near the door, positioning himself with his back to the wall and his gaze outward. Guarding came as naturally as breathing. Ethan shrugged out of his jacket and hung it on a hook by the door. He filled a metal bowl with water and set it near Rex without ceremony. Rex glanced at it but did not drink. Duty first. Ethan turned away, setting about building a fire with the quiet efficiency of habit. As flames caught, shadows leaped across the walls, stretching and shrinking like restless memories. The crackle of wood was too close to the sound of distant gunfire for comfort. Ethan's jaw tightened. Rex's ears flicked, but he did not move. Night settled fully. Outside, an owl called once, its voice cutting cleanly through the dark. Rex responded by shifting closer to the door, stance widening just enough to brace. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the fire without seeing it. He had imagined this moment, returning to isolation, believing distance would dull what followed him. Instead, the quiet amplified everything. His chest felt tight, breath shallow. He did not reach for the bottle he kept in the cabinet. He had not touched it in weeks. He did not trust himself to stop if he started. When he finally lay down on the bed, sleep did not come easily. The mattress creaked under his weight. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Rex lay just outside the bedroom door, body aligned with the hallway, ears trained forward. Hours passed like that. At some point, Ethan drifted into shallow sleep, only to jolt awake at a noise that did not exist. His heart hammered. Sweat chilled his skin. He sat up, reaching instinctively for a weapon that was no longer there. In the doorway, Rex stood, silent and solid, eyes reflecting firelight from the stove. He did not approach. He did not retreat. He held position. The message was simple. You are not alone. Ethan exhaled, long and unsteady. Eventually, his pulse slowed. Rex returned to his post. Morning arrived pale and uncertain. Frost clung to the edges of leaves, and breath fogged the air inside the cabin until Ethan stirred the fire again. Rex remained watchful, but allowed himself to sit, then lie down once Ethan moved about the space with purpose. Ethan brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the room. He poured some into a chipped mug, then paused, uncertain. He fetched another bowl and filled it with food, setting it down gently. Rex approached after a moment, sniffed, then ate with measured restraint, never turning his back to the room. Ethan watched, saying nothing. Trust, he knew, grew in quiet increments. Later that morning, a truck rumbled faintly down the road and stopped near the clearing. Rex was on his feet instantly, body tense, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Ethan stepped outside, hand raised in a calming gesture that was not a command, but a suggestion. The visitor was Caleb Turner, a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and a build shaped by decades of manual labor. His beard was gray and untrimmed, his flannel shirt patched at the elbows. Caleb owned the nearest neighboring property miles away and had learned to check on newcomers out of habit rather than kindness. His eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Ethan. "Didn't know you had a dog," he said, tone cautious. Ethan nodded. "Just got him." Caleb studied Rex's stance, the discipline in it. He recognized something he could not name. "That one's serious," he said. "Not a judgment? An observation?" Rex held his ground, eyes fixed on Caleb until Ethan shifted slightly. Only then did he relax a fraction. Caleb gave a short nod. "Well, welcome," he said, then left without further questions. The truck faded into the trees. Rex watched until the sound was gone. The days that followed found a rhythm, neither of them named. Ethan spent hours outside, chopping wood, repairing a fence, moving with the quiet focus of someone rebuilding order piece by piece. Rex shadowed him, maintaining distance but never losing sight. When Ethan stopped, Rex stopped. When Ethan rested, Rex positioned himself to watch the tree line. At night, Rex resumed his vigil by the door. During the day, Ethan sometimes sat on the porch, staring into the forest as if expecting something to emerge. He could not have said what he was waiting for. Rex seemed to understand that waiting was part of the task. They were strangers, sharing space, bound not by affection, but necessity. Neither trusted easily. Both understood what it meant to stand watch when no one else would. The cabin remained quiet, but it was no longer empty. As the fourth night settled over the trees, Rex laid down at the threshold, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Ethan sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Ghosts lingered in the silence, but they did not rule it. Two lives occupied the same shelter, learning the shape of each other's presence, unable to let go, not yet ready to hold on, standing together in a quiet that felt less dangerous than it had before. The trouble did not announce itself all at once. It arrived in fragments, carried on uneasy conversations and glances that lingered a little too long. The nearest town, a modest place with a single main street and buildings worn smooth by decades of wind and winter, had always relied on familiarity for its sense of safety. Everyone knew everyone, or at least knew who they belonged to. When that balance shifted, people felt it in their bones before they could explain it in words. It began with livestock. A rancher named Harold Green, a heavy-set man in his early 60s, with a stooped back and hands permanently stained by oil and dirt, lost 2 calves in 1 week. Harold had lived his entire life on the edge of town, his temperament blunt but fair, a man who trusted fences, dogs, and routine more than people. He swore the fences had been intact. No blood, no tracks that made sense. The animals were simply gone. He laughed it off at first, a nervous sound that did not reach his eyes, blaming predators he could not name. By the second loss, he stopped laughing. Others followed. Chickens vanished from coops without feathers left behind. A sheep disappeared from a field too close to the road for comfort. Parents began walking their children home from school, hands resting protectively on small shoulders. The children noticed first. They always did. A group of them refused to play near the tree line anymore, insisting something was watching. Fear sharpened their imaginations, but it also sharpened their instincts. At night, lights stayed on longer. Curtains remained half-drawn. Ethan heard about it at the feed store, where he had gone for supplies he barely knew how to name. The owner, Martha Collins, a woman in her early 50s with iron-gray hair cut blunt at the jaw and a voice that carried without effort, spoke while ringing up his purchase. Martha had raised 3 sons alone and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had learned to stand firm in the face of chaos. "Something's wrong out there," she said, not looking at him. "This town hasn't felt like this in a long time." Ethan listened, expression unreadable. Rex lay at his feet, still as stone, ears flicking at every sound, cataloging tension he did not understand but did not ignore. The local sheriff, Ben Holloway, tried to project calm. Ben was in his late 40s, tall but soft around the middle, his uniform pressed more out of habit than pride. He had taken the job after years as a deputy, believing in order and process. What he did not believe in was panic. He dismissed talk of threats with tired reassurances, citing coyotes and mountain lions. Yet even he had begun to feel the unease creep under his skin. The reports did not add up. Predators left signs. This did not. At the cabin, Rex sensed the change long before Ethan put the pieces together. The forest no longer settled at night the way it once had. Sounds carried differently. The wind felt sharper. Rex's posture changed subtly, weight forward, muscles coiled even at rest. Ethan noticed the way Rex's gaze lingered on the tree line, the way his ears tracked movement that Ethan could not hear. He trusted that awareness more than his own. The night Rex howled came without warning. The sky was moonless, clouds pressed low, the forest a mass of black shapes and whispered movement. Ethan had just set down his mug when the sound tore through the silence. It was not a cry of fear. It was long, controlled, resonant, a warning, the kind meant to be heard. Rex stood at the edge of the clearing, head lifted, voice cutting clean through the dark. Ethan was on his feet instantly, heart pounding, instincts flaring. He followed Rex's gaze, scanning the shadows. Nothing revealed itself. The howl faded, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Ethan did not sleep after that. Neither did Rex. At dawn, Ethan drove into town again, not for supplies, but for answers. He listened more than he spoke, the way he always had. He watched Rex as they walked, noting how people reacted. Some stepped back, wary of the dog's size and intensity. Others felt reassured by his presence without knowing why. Children stared openly, curiosity overcoming fear. Rex remained calm, moving with purpose, responding not to commands, but to Ethan's subtle shifts in pace and direction. By evening, Ethan understood enough to feel uneasy. This was not random. Whatever was happening followed patterns. It avoided light, it tested boundaries. That was something Ethan recognized. He did not voice his thoughts. He did not call the sheriff. He returned to the cabin, restless, pacing. Rex followed him, matching his movements, sensing the shift from observation to intent. That night, the howl came again, closer. Rex stood rigid, every line of his body aligned toward the forest. Ethan grabbed a flashlight, then hesitated, setting it down. Light announced presence. Silence did not. He trusted Rex's instincts. Together, they moved to the edge of the clearing. Rex did not surge forward. He waited, muscles trembling with restrained energy. This was not about obedience. This was about choice. A sound drifted from the trees. Low, intentional, not an animal moving blindly. Rex's ears flattened slightly, his stance lowering. Ethan felt the familiar narrowing of focus settle over him, the quiet clarity he had not felt in years. He did not tell Rex what to do. He did not need to. Rex stepped forward on his own, placing himself between the sound and the cabin, body broad and unmistakable. His presence was a declaration. The forest answered with silence. Minutes stretched. The sound did not return. Rex held his ground until the tension bled slowly from the air. Only then did he turn back, glancing at Ethan as if checking a perimeter. Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Whatever this was, it had been warned. Word spread quickly the next morning. Nothing else disappeared that night. Parents relaxed slightly. Ranchers checked fences with cautious optimism. No one knew why the change had happened, only that it had. Ethan said nothing. Rex rested near the porch, eyes scanning the horizon, not triumphant, simply alert. Something inside him had awakened, not because a handler had ordered it, but because he had decided it mattered. The town did not yet know it needed a guardian. Rex did. And for the first time since leaving the service, he was not waiting for permission. The forest beyond the cabin had changed its voice. Morning in this part of Montana usually carried a steady rhythm. Wind brushing the tops of pines, distant birds testing the cold air, the quiet assurance that nothing was wrong. That day the silence was uneven, broken in places where sound should have been. Low clouds hung between the trees, pressing the sky down until the world felt smaller, closer, as if whatever hid within it could reach out and touch you. A thin fog clung to the ground, dampening footsteps and swallowing distance. Ethan Walker felt it in his chest before he could name it. Rex felt it before Ethan even noticed. Rex stood at the edge of the clearing, body angled toward the forest, muscles taut beneath his dark coat. At 9 years old, the German shepherd carried himself with a gravity that came not from age, but experience. His scarred ear twitched as he sampled the air, nostrils flaring, breath controlled. His tail was still, neither relaxed nor raised. This was not excitement. This was assessment. Ethan watched him from the porch, coffee forgotten in his hand. He had learned over years that refused to leave him, to trust the subtle signals. Rex was not restless. Rex was certain. Ethan did not reach for his phone. There was no radio to clip to his vest, no command channel to open, no team waiting for coordinates. He dressed quietly, pulling on his jacket, lacing his boots with deliberate care. His movements were automatic, stripped of ritual and bravado. This was not a deployment. There was no mission packet. Yet his body recognized the preparation all the same. When Rex glanced back at him, eyes steady, Ethan nodded once. That was all it took. They stepped into the forest together. The trees closed around them, swallowing the clearing behind, as if it had never existed. The ground was soft with needles and damp leaves, absorbing sound. Rex moved ahead, but never far, checking back with brief glances that asked without asking. Ethan followed, trusting the dog's path without questioning it. Trust was not something he offered easily. It had been broken too often by bad intelligence and worse decisions. With Rex, it felt different. Rex did not interpret. He observed. They moved for nearly an hour, deeper than Ethan usually went, the air growing colder, the fog thickening. Then Rex slowed, body lowering slightly, head dipping toward the ground. The scent was wrong. Metal, oil, human sweat layered over fear and intent. Rex paused, lifting one paw, then set it down again. Careful. Ethan stopped behind him, breath shallow, every sense awake. He heard it then. A murmur of voices, low and controlled, the clink of equipment not meant for hunting. This was not a rancher tracking a lost animal. This was organized. They crouched behind a fallen log, watching. Through the trees, Ethan saw them. 4 men, spread out with practiced spacing. They wore dark clothing, faces partially covered, rifles slung with casual familiarity. One man knelt near a tarp on the ground, hands moving quickly. Traps. Heavy ones. Illegal. The kind meant to hold, not kill, at least not immediately. Poachers. Armed. Ethan felt a familiar surge of anger rise and settle into focus. These men were not starving. They were methodical. They were choosing profit over life. Rex stiffened, a low sound vibrating in his chest, barely audible. Ethan placed a hand near his shoulder, not touching, just close enough to remind. Rex did not surge forward. He waited. Ethan's mind raced, cataloging options. He was one man, unarmed, with a dog who had already given more than anyone had the right to ask. There was no backup, no authority, just choice. The wind shifted. One of the men straightened, scanning the woods. His eyes passed over their position without seeing. Rex moved then, not charging, not barking. He slipped forward, a shadow among shadows, placing himself where he could be seen. One of the men cursed softly, lifting his rifle. Rex stopped, stance wide, head high. He did not bare his teeth. He did not attack. He stood. The effect was immediate. The men froze, surprise breaking their formation. A trained dog was not part of the plan. Ethan rose behind him, hands visible, voice steady. He spoke calmly, not issuing threats, not shouting orders. He spoke like someone who had nothing to prove. The words themselves mattered less than the tone. Rex remained between Ethan and the rifles, body aligned to block, to contain. One man took a step forward. Rex mirrored it, maintaining distance without aggression. This was control. This was restraint. A tense standoff stretched thin. The men argued in hushed voices, weighing risk against reward. This was no longer easy. This was no longer quiet. Finally, one of them spat into the dirt and jerked his head back. They began to retreat, slow at first, then faster, leaving the traps behind, unwilling to escalate. Rex did not pursue. He held position until the last sound of retreat faded into the trees. Only then did he relax, turning back toward Ethan, breathing hard but controlled. Ethan knelt beside him, hand finally resting on Rex's shoulder, feeling the warmth, the tremor of restrained adrenaline. "Good," he murmured, not as praise, but recognition. Rex leaned briefly into the touch, then straightened again, scanning. Compassion, Ethan realized, did not mean weakness. It meant choosing when not to destroy. They dismantled the traps together, Ethan working carefully, Rex watching the perimeter. It took time. When they finished, the forest felt different, lighter, as if a pressure had been released. On the walk back, Rex moved closer to Ethan than before, not guarding, simply accompanying. Ethan felt something settle inside him, a shift he had not known he was waiting for. He had acted not because he was ordered to, not because it was his job, but because it was right. That choice carried a weight and a freedom he had forgotten. By the time the cabin came into view, the fog had lifted, sunlight filtering through branches in pale bands. Rex paused at the edge of the clearing, then continued, posture easing. The mission was over. No report to file, no commendation to earn, just the quiet knowledge that something had been protected. Ethan stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the forest return to its rhythm. Rex lay down nearby, eyes half closed, watchful but calm. A soldier had learned restraint. A man had remembered purpose. No one had given them this mission. They had taken it anyway. Morning arrived quietly in the small Montana town, the kind of quiet that only follows a night when nothing went wrong. Pale sunlight slipped through thinning clouds, warming the wooden facades along the main road and drawing steam from the damp earth. The river moved steadily beyond the buildings, unchanged, as if reminding everyone that life had continued even while fear had lingered nearby. The air carried the smell of fresh bread, pine, and melting frost, and for the first time in days, doors opened without hesitation. When the police vehicles reached the edge of the forest, there was nothing left to confront. Sheriff Ben Holloway stepped out slowly, his broad frame moving with visible relief. In his late 40s, Ben carried authority without sharpness, his uniform worn more from repetition than pride. He surveyed the dismantled traps, the disturbed ground, the absence of resistance. No bodies, no injuries, no gunfire. He listened to Ethan's account with careful attention, nodding once when it ended. "Looks like whatever it was decided to leave," he said, voice low. Ethan met his gaze and said nothing more. There was nothing else that needed to be said. Rex remained nearby, seated on the forest floor, posture composed. The German shepherd's dark coat caught the morning light, highlighting the faint gray along his muzzle and the old scar on his ear. At 9 years old, he no longer carried the restless edge of a working dog awaiting instruction. Instead, he radiated a grounded awareness, alert without tension. When the deputies moved closer, Rex tracked them calmly, assessing without threat. Ben noticed. He had seen aggressive dogs before. This was not that. This was restraint. By midday, word had spread through town, not as rumor, but as relief. Ranchers spoke openly again. Store owners left doors propped open. At the feed store, Martha Collins moved with a lighter step, her iron-gray hair pinned back as usual, but her eyes softer. She slid a paper bag across the counter to Ethan when he came in for supplies. Inside was bread, still warm, wrapped in simple paper. "On the house," she said, her tone firm enough to discourage refusal. Ethan accepted with a quiet nod. Rex lay at his feet, unmoving, his presence grounding rather than imposing. Martha glanced down at him, then back at Ethan. "Town could use more guardians like that," she said. The word lingered. On the drive back to the cabin, Ethan noticed small changes. A raised hand from a passing truck, a nod from a man he did not know. No one asked questions. No one pressed for details. Gratitude, he realized, did not always need explanation. Sometimes it only needed acknowledgement. That evening, the cabin felt different, not louder, not fuller, simply settled. The bread sat on the table, broken and shared between one man and one dog. Outside, the forest breathed in long, steady rhythms. Rex positioned himself near the porch, not blocking the entrance, not standing guard in the old way, but watching all the same. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, hands loose, shoulders no longer drawn tight. Sleep came easier that night, not deep, not perfect, but unburdened by the sudden jolts that had haunted him for years. When Ethan woke before dawn, the room was still, the fire reduced to embers. Rex lay nearby, breathing slow and even. For a long moment, Ethan simply sat there, listening, realizing something with a quiet certainty that startled him more than any nightmare ever had. He did not feel like a weapon left behind. Later that morning, Sheriff Holloway stopped by alone. He removed his hat as he approached the porch, his expression thoughtful rather than official. "Things are calmer," he said. people are sleeping again. His gaze flicked briefly to Rex, who acknowledged him with a steady look before settling back down. "They've started calling him something," Ben added. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Forest guard," Ben said, almost amused. Ethan smiled faintly. The name felt earned. As the days passed, the name stayed, not spoken loudly, not painted on signs, just shared in conversations, carried with respect. Rex did not respond to it, but he responded to the absence of fear around him, to the way voices softened when he passed, to the way tension eased without effort. Ethan noticed the change in himself as well. He found purpose not in orders or authority, but in presence, in staying, in choosing restraint when violence would have been easier. Redemption, Ethan learned, did not arrive dressed in uniform or ceremony. It arrived in the quiet acceptance of being useful without being commanded. It arrived in a dog who chose to protect without needing permission. As evening painted the sky in muted gold and gray, Ethan stood on the porch beside Rex, watching the tree line. The forest remained still. The town rested. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan did not feel broken. He felt allowed to remain. Time changed the mountains first, then the forest, and only later did it make itself known in the quiet spaces of the cabin. Seasons folded into one another with patient certainty. Spring softened the ground, summer thickened the air with green life, autumn burned the hills, gold and rust, and winter returned with its familiar weight. Through it all, the small Montana town continued at its unremarkable pace, no longer marked by fear, but by routine. The weather that morning was clear and cold, sunlight pale but honest, frost clinging to the grass like a final reminder of the night. Rex felt the years before Ethan admitted them. At 9, then 10, his movements grew more deliberate. The hind leg that had once stiffened only in the cold now carried a permanent slowness. He could still run, but not for long. He could still leap, but not without calculation. His dark coat faded gradually, silver threading through the black and brown, especially along his muzzle and chest. His eyes, however, remained unchanged, steady, present, aware. He rose each morning and took his place near the door, not because he feared what lay beyond it, but because this was where he belonged. Guarding no longer meant scanning for enemies. It meant holding space. Ethan Walker noticed everything. He noticed how Rex rose more slowly from sleep, how he paused before climbing the porch steps, how his breathing deepened after long walks. Ethan himself had changed too. The sharpness had softened in his face. The lines around his eyes no longer pulled downward. His hair grew longer than it ever had during service, the gray no longer something to be managed. He dressed for comfort now rather than function, though the boots remained. Some habits stayed because they had earned their place. Their days found a rhythm shaped by understanding rather than instruction. Mornings began with quiet. Coffee for Ethan. Water for Rex. A shared pause on the porch as the forest woke around them. Rex still scanned the tree line, but his stance had eased, weight no longer forward, tail resting comfortably against the boards. Ethan worked around the cabin, repairing what needed repair, leaving the rest alone. He had learned that not everything broken needed fixing. Some things only needed acceptance. Visitors came occasionally. Sheriff Ben Holloway stopped by less often now, his posture lighter each time, his visits more social than official. He and Ethan would stand by the fence and talk about weather and land and nothing at all. Ben aged too, his hair thinning, his voice carrying a gentler authority. Rex acknowledged him with calm interest, then returned to his watch. Ben always nodded at that. He understood guardianship when he saw it. Sarah Mitchell visited once, months after everything had settled. She arrived in an old pickup, stepping out with the same measured grace she carried at the facility. She had not changed much, still tall and lean, hair pulled back, eyes steady. Loss had shaped her, but it had not hardened her. She approached Rex slowly, allowing him to set the distance. Rex sniffed her hand and accepted it, tail swaying once. Sarah smiled, a small, genuine thing. She walked the property with Ethan, listening more than speaking. When she left, she said only, "You did right by him." Ethan nodded. He did not trust his voice with more. As the years edged forward, Rex's world narrowed without shrinking. Walks grew shorter, but no less meaningful. He learned the warmth of afternoon sun on the porch, the satisfaction of simply being present. Ethan adjusted without ceremony, matching Rex's pace, choosing paths that were kind to aging joints. The forest responded in its own way. Deer no longer startled at Rex's presence. Birds resumed their routines. Balance had returned, quiet and unremarkable. One winter morning, Rex did not rise immediately. The frost was heavy, the air sharp enough to bite. Ethan waited, listening to Rex's breathing, steady but slower than before. When Rex did stand, he moved with care, favoring the old injury more noticeably. Ethan held the door open longer than usual, allowing Rex to step out on his own time. Rex took his place at the threshold, facing the forest, body aligned not for defense, but for belonging. He stood there as the sun crept higher, warming his back. Ethan joined him, resting a hand gently on Rex's head. The fur was thinner now beneath his fingers, the warmth familiar. He did not speak right away. Words had learned patience in this place. Rex leaned subtly into the touch, eyes half-lidded, content. The forest was still. The town beyond it lived its quiet life. Nothing demanded action, nothing needed proving. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was soft, unguarded. "Good boy," he said. The words carried no command, no expectation, only gratitude. Rex did not respond because he did not need to. He understood the tone, the intent behind it. He had learned that the greatest missions did not come with orders. They came with choice. Rex lay down then, not because he was tired, but because standing watch no longer required standing. His breathing slowed, body relaxing into the boards. Ethan remained beside him, hand resting lightly, the smile on his face unforced. He watched the tree line without urgency, knowing that whatever came next would be met not with violence or fear, but with presence. The seasons would continue. Rex would age further. One day he would not rise at all. Ethan knew this without flinching. He had learned that loving something did not protect it from time. It gave the time meaning. Rex's mission had never been war. It had never truly been obedience. It had been this: to guard a life, to share a space, to choose restraint over destruction. Ethan stayed there until the sun climbed fully into the sky, the frost melting beneath its light. He did not feel loss in that moment. He felt completion.